The call came in at 11:47 p.m. A man's voice, shaking, gasping between words. "My wife. She's not breathing." Sirens sliced through the quiet streets of La Jolla, their red and blue lights flashing against the white walls of a $1 million home. Officers rushed through the grand entrance, stepping into what should have been a peaceful, welcoming home, a space for a growing family. Instead, what they found was something far darker. A woman lay sprawled across the marble floor of the master bedroom, her body still, her face frozen in an expression of terror. Nearby, a shattered phone, its screen flickering. A single, unsent message left open, "Marcus. Tyrone knows." The woman was Tasha Walker, 33 years old, 6 months pregnant. Her husband, Tyrone Walker, stood over her, his hands trembling. To the outside world, Tyrone was everything a man was supposed to be: brilliant, successful, respected. A cardiologist who saved lives for a living. A man who had everything. But love, when tangled with betrayal, has a way of twisting even the most well-intentioned people into something unrecognizable. At first glance, it could have been a tragic accident, a terrible misunderstanding. But the evidence told another story. The shattered phone, the marks on her neck, the bruises beginning to form under her skin. Somewhere in the wreckage of that night, the truth waited to be uncovered. A marriage built on love, destroyed by a secret. A betrayal that had festered in the dark. A crime born from rage, from heartbreak, from something far deeper. Before the night was over, the life Tyrone Walker had spent years building would come crashing down in an instant. Before we uncover the twisted secrets behind this brutal murder, take a second to subscribe to Beyond the Evidence. Hit the like button, turn on notifications. Because the story of Tyrone Walker and Tasha? It's just beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Tyrone Walker was the kind of man people admired. 38 years old. A cardiologist at the peak of his career. His name carried weight in San Diego's medical community, his face occasionally gracing the pages of health magazines, praised for his advancements in preventive medicine. Patients trusted him, colleagues respected him, and in the pristine halls of his private practice, he was a man who saved lives. But at home, in the quiet of his La Jolla estate, he was something else entirely. For 6 years, he had been married to Tasha. The kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room, not just because she was beautiful, but because she was magnetic. At 33, she was a fitness instructor with a growing social media presence, her days spent in the bright California sun, coaching clients, posting workout videos, engaging with her followers like they were close friends. People loved Tasha. They loved her energy, the way she made them feel like anything was possible. And Tyrone. He loved her too. At least, that's what he told himself. They had been trying for a baby for over a year. When Tasha finally announced she was pregnant, Tyrone was ecstatic, or so he claimed. He posted about it, told his colleagues, sent ultrasound pictures to his family back home in Chicago. To everyone watching, he was a man thrilled to become a father. But beneath the surface, the foundation of their marriage had already begun to crack. Because there was something else about Tyrone. Something people didn't see in those magazine features or hospital corridors. Control. It started subtly. Checking Tasha's texts when she left the room. Questioning why she was home late. Scrolling through her social media, analyzing every comment, every like, every interaction. "You spend more time with your clients than you do with me," he would say, smiling, but there was always something in his tone. A pressure. A quiet expectation. Tasha laughed it off, called him protective. But in the last few months, her laughter had started to sound forced. She hesitated when he asked about her schedule, answered questions just a little too carefully. Something had changed, and Tyrone could feel it. He just didn't know what it was yet. But he would. Because in the end, the truth has a way of surfacing. And when it did, when Tyrone finally learned what Tasha had been hiding, he wouldn't just lose his wife. He would lose everything. It started with numbers. Tyrone Walker had always trusted numbers. Numbers were precise, reliable. They didn't lie, didn't falter under pressure, didn't betray. He had spent his life building a career on numbers, heart rates, cholesterol levels, EKG readings. A few digits on a screen could tell him everything he needed to know about a person's health. And now, they were telling him something about his wife. It was a Saturday morning when he first noticed it. Tasha was in the shower, steam curling under the bathroom door, her phone charging on the bedside table. Tyrone wasn't snooping. At least, that's what he told himself. He just wanted to check something. Tasha's Fitbit data synced automatically to her phone. She had shown him before, boasting about her progress, scrolling through her stats. Calories burned. Steps taken. Average heart rate. Tyrone opened the app. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then, his eyes caught something strange. A spike. A sharp, unnatural increase in her heart rate, one that didn't belong. Tyrone frowned. He scrolled back through the week. There it was again. Another spike. And another. Always in the afternoons. Always during what she called her training sessions. His stomach twisted. Training sessions with Carlos. Carlos Rivera. Tyrone's tennis partner. A man he had invited into their home, shared drinks with after matches, laughed with over stupid sports debates. Carlos, who, now that Tyrone thought about it, always had something to say about Tasha. He remembered the way Carlos looked at her. The way Tasha had started mentioning him more often, casually slipping his name into conversations. The way she had begun leaving the house in tighter leggings, a little more makeup, an extra spritz of perfume before heading out for work. It could be a coincidence. That's what Tyrone told himself. Maybe she was just pushing herself harder at the gym. Maybe she was stressed. But numbers didn't lie. And neither did the voice in the back of his head. Tyrone started watching her more closely. Her phone, always within reach. Her body, turned slightly away when she texted. The way she flinched when he reached for her wrist, like she expected him to check something. Then came the final confirmation. One night, while Tasha was asleep, Tyrone took her phone. The screen was locked, but notifications still popped up. And there it was. A message from Carlos. "You're glowing, Hermosa. Can't wait to meet our little one." Our little one. The words didn't register at first. They sat there, meaningless, floating in a haze of disbelief. Then, the weight of them sank in. Tyrone felt something inside him splinter. His breath grew shallow. His fingers tightened around the phone. He wanted to wake her up, shake her, scream. He wanted to tell her she was lying, that this was all a mistake, that there was no way this could be happening. But doctors didn't operate on emotions. They operated on facts. So Tyrone decided to get proof. A DNA test. Tasha had given blood at her last prenatal checkup. All Tyrone needed was his own sample to confirm what he already suspected. He sent it in without telling her. The results came back on a Thursday. Tyrone sat at his desk, the envelope heavy in his hands, fingers trembling as he tore it open. He skimmed the lines, heart hammering in his chest. Probability of paternity, 0%. His vision blurred. The words swam before him, mocking, unchangeable. 0%. Zero. Nothing. The baby was not his. The numbers didn't lie. And just like that, the man who had spent his life saving hearts felt his own shatter. It's the little things that unravel a man. A glance that lingers too long. A conversation that halts the moment he enters the room. The way his wife, the woman who used to melt into him at night, now shifts away when he touches her. Tyrone wasn't a fool. He had seen the truth in cold black and white ink, stamped with medical certainty, probability of paternity, 0%, but still, a part of him refused to accept it. Maybe there had been a mistake. A lab error. A mix-up in samples. Maybe Tasha had been drugged, coerced, tricked. Because if that wasn't true, if she had willingly done this, if she had carried another man's child while looking Tyrone in the eyes, sleeping next to him, laughing at his jokes, then that meant... No. He wasn't ready to finish that thought. Instead, Tyrone did what any rational man would do. He watched. He started small. Casual glances at her phone when she set it down, pretending to scroll through his own. Hovering near the bathroom when she showered, listening as she murmured into the steam. Her schedule, once predictable, began shifting. Errands took longer. Phone calls were taken outside, her voice hushed. She was hiding something. And Tyrone was going to find out what. The first real crack came on a Sunday afternoon. Tasha had left her phone on the kitchen counter, screen up. He wasn't expecting it. She was usually so careful. But fate has a way of revealing the inevitable. A message lit up the screen. Carlos, I can't wait to meet him. Him. Tyrone's breath caught in his throat. Him. A boy. A son. Not his. His stomach clenched so hard he thought he might be sick. The room around him blurred, the edges closing in, shrinking. The phone screen was blinding, the letters swimming before his eyes. Tasha's footsteps padded down the hallway. Tyrone forced himself to move, grabbing a glass from the sink, turning just as she entered the kitchen. Her hair was damp. Loose curls clung to her collarbone. She had that glow people always talked about in pregnant women, skin dewy, eyes soft. It made him sick. He forced a smile. "You're back late," he said, setting the glass down carefully. She smiled, tight, cautious. Stopped for a smoothie. A lie. He could smell it on her. He glanced at the counter. Her phone was gone. From that moment, Tyrone played a game of control. Every question was a needle, a test, a way to see her. "Are you sure you're ready for this, baby?" A flicker of hesitation. Barely there, but he saw it. "I was thinking of redecorating the nursery. Maybe something more personal." A twitch in her jaw. A slight shift in weight. She was bracing for something. She knew. She knew that he knew. And still, she said nothing. Tyrone began waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. He would roll over, watching the steady rise and fall of Tasha's chest, the soft parting of her lips as she dreamed. Did she dream of Carlos? Did she picture him in the hospital room, standing beside her while she held their baby? The thought drove him mad. One night, he caught himself standing over her, watching, waiting. A part of him wondered what would happen if he pressed his hand against her throat. Would she wake up in time? Would she see his face, full of rage, full of love? His fingers flexed at the thought. And then Tasha stirred, a soft sigh escaping her lips. Tyrone forced himself to step back. Not yet. Tasha knew. She had known for weeks, but she told herself it was paranoia, that Tyrone was just acting strangely because of stress. because of work. But then she started noticing the way he looked at her. The way his hand lingered just a little too long on her arm. The way his fingers gripped too tightly when he helped her out of a chair. The way his eyes traced her stomach, not with love, but with something else. Something darker. She needed to leave. Quietly, without a fight. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment, but deep down, she knew there would never be one. So she planned. A bag tucked away in the back of the closet. Important documents hidden in the lining of her purse. She told her friend, Maria, one evening over coffee. Tyrone's been acting different. Maria laughed. You're hormonal. All men act weird when a baby's coming. Tasha forced a smile. She didn't bring it up again. Because Maria was wrong. Tyrone wasn't just acting different. Tyrone was changing. And then, one night, he found the message. Tasha was in the shower when Tyrone saw it. A notification, barely noticeable. He shouldn't have looked. But he did. Carlos, still thinking about last night? A single sentence. That was all it took. Tyrone's world shattered into something unrecognizable. Last night, while he had been in his home, sleeping in his bed, under the same roof as his wife, she had been with him. Tyrone didn't remember picking up her phone. Didn't remember squeezing it so hard the screen cracked beneath his fingers. But he did. By the time Tasha walked back into the bedroom, hair wrapped in a towel, humming to herself, Tyrone was already waiting. Calm. Steady. Holding the phone in his hand. She stopped. The color drained from her face. He turned the phone around, letting her see the message. Letting her see him. Tasha swallowed hard. Tyrone. Still thinking about last night, he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. Tasha took a step back. Tyrone took a step forward. And this time, he didn't stop. The house was dark when Tasha returned. The only light came from the street lamps outside, casting long shadows across the living room. The silence hung thick in the air, pressing against the walls like a living thing. Every step she took as she entered was slow, deliberate, like she was trying to avoid waking something. She didn't notice him at first. Tasha kicked off her shoes by the door, sighing softly as if nothing was wrong. She adjusted the strap of her gym bag, rubbing her temples like she had just survived a marathon. But the exhaustion in her voice, the way she moved, there was something off. A kind of weariness that wasn't just physical. This wasn't a normal night. The second she heard the faint sound of a step, her head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. The faint glow from the street lamps lit her face, revealing the flash of panic that flickered across her features. She'd known. The room felt heavier now. Tasha shifted on her feet, uncertain. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. Jesus, Tyrone, you scared the hell out of me. She smiled, but it wasn't real. The way her fingers trembled as she brushed her hair from her forehead, the nervous laugh, it wasn't the act of a woman at ease. It was the act of a woman hiding something. I got caught up at the gym, she said quickly, her voice a little too high. Long session. Just really wiped out. The words didn't sit right. They never did anymore. Weeks of little things, of tiny inconsistencies that stacked up until they couldn't be ignored. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, watching her. Her gaze flickered to the side, then back again, like she was weighing her options. Tasha's fingers curled tighter around the bag strap, a subtle but unmistakable sign of unease. The air between them thickened, tension building with every passing second. "Give me your phone," he said, his voice quiet, calm. But underneath, there was something hard. The words were more like a command than a request. Tasha froze. Her breath hitched, and her eyes darted toward the door, the window, anything to escape. "What?" she asked, voice trembling just slightly, her mouth dry. "The phone," he repeated, stepping forward just enough that the distance between them closed by a fraction. The silence that followed was deafening. Tasha swallowed, her throat moving visibly. "Tyrone, why?" Her eyes flickered, looking for an out. She wasn't sure what to say anymore. The truth was sitting right there between them, but neither one could reach it just yet. He took another step. Closer. Her body tensed, her chest rising and falling too quickly. The weight of the moment pressing on both of them. "Now," he said, his voice low, barely a whisper. But the command was there. Tasha hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the strap of the bag, pulling it closer to her chest like a shield. A brief flash of fear flashed in her eyes, barely noticeable, but it was enough. She knew she couldn't hide anymore. Not from him. "Don't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. The words were meant to placate, to buy time, but they only made things worse. The phone was the key. She knew it. And she couldn't keep running from what had already been set in motion. Without warning, he moved. The bag was yanked from her shoulder in one smooth motion, the strap digging into her skin as it was pulled from her grasp. Tasha stumbled back, her heart racing. She pressed herself against the wall, as if hoping the coldness of it might stop the inevitable. He didn't care. The bag hit the floor, and the phone was in his hands. He didn't even need to look at it. He knew what he'd find. The screen came to life under his touch. The message from Marcus was still there, plain as day. "Marcus, I can't wait to meet him." The blood in his veins turned to ice. His knuckles whitened around the phone as the words burned into his mind. Him. The truth, raw and cutting, made the room feel smaller. The trust, the love, the life they had built together, all of it came crashing down in a heartbeat. The silence that followed was suffocating. Tasha didn't speak, couldn't speak. Her mouth was open, but no words came out. Her gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet his eyes. "Who the hell is this?" The words were barely a breath, but they cut through the tension like a blade. Her breath caught, her chest heaving, but still she didn't answer. Her hands twitched, as if wanting to run but knowing it was too late. She knew what had been uncovered. There was no escaping it now. "Who the hell is Marcus?" The words came again, sharper this time, edged with the kind of anger that had been simmering just beneath the surface. Tasha's eyes flickered toward him, then quickly away. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was shaking, trembling, unable to meet his gaze. Finally, her voice broke through, but it was nothing more than a whisper, filled with shame. He's the father." The words hit harder than anything he'd felt in years. The room seemed to tilt, everything spinning around him as the weight of her betrayal sank in. All the days, all the nights, every moment of trust shattered in the space of a breath. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The truth was louder than anything. It was all he could hear now. The phone slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. There was no going back. The moment Marcus heard the news, everything changed. Tasha was dead. The weight of those words hit him with a brutal, suffocating finality. He had never imagined it would go this far. It was supposed to be a fleeting affair, an escape, a mistake, nothing more. But now, the woman he had betrayed his wife with was gone, murdered by the man he had betrayed her for. Panic consumed him. His mind raced, spinning out of control as his hands trembled while he hastily threw clothes into a suitcase, not even bothering to fold them. Nothing mattered now. The life he had built, the routine he had relied on, all of it seemed so distant in that moment. The only thing that remained was the urgent need to disappear. Without a second thought, he crossed the border into Mexico. The night air was thick with anxiety and fear as Marcus hurried across the border, seeking refuge in the chaos of his panic. He had hoped for escape, for a momentary reprieve from the consequences that had already started to close in on him. But what he hadn't anticipated was how quickly the net would tighten. The news spread like wildfire, his name, his image, his face plastered everywhere. Within days, the Mexican authorities were alerted, and a manhunt was underway. The life he had thought he could flee from was now chasing him faster than he could run. Within weeks, Marcus was caught, extradited back to the U.S., and returned to face the fallout of his actions. The walls closed in. There was no escaping the harsh reality of what had transpired. The world was watching now. The news of Tasha's death sent shockwaves across the nation. Tyrone Walker, once a respected cardiologist, was now at the center of a tragedy that no one could comprehend. His colleagues, who had once admired his skill and expertise, were left in stunned silence. How had it come to this? How had a man who had saved lives become the one who took them? But it wasn't just the medical community that was shaken. Tasha had her own circle, a loyal following of friends, admirers, and clients. The fitness instructor had been more than just a popular figure on social media. She had been a beacon of energy, warmth, and strength for those who knew her. Her friends flooded social media with tributes, their words a sharp contrast to the horrific reality of what had happened. She was full of life. I can't believe she's gone. We lost a beautiful soul today. Images of Tasha, laughing, dancing, living her life, poured into the internet. Her fans shared memories, pictures of her vibrant energy, mourning the woman they had followed for so long. But it wasn't just Tasha's spirit that lingered in the memories of those who loved her. It was the house, the dream home, now stained with tragedy. The place where Tasha and Tyrone had planned their future together. Where they had imagined a nursery, a family, a life full of love and hope. Now, it was a memorial. People gathered outside the estate, leaving flowers, candles, and heartfelt messages. The house stood as a silent witness to a crime that had shattered more than just lives. It had shattered a dream. What was once a place of hope was now a site of mourning. The walls closed in on Tyrone Walker quickly after the murder. His actions, his rage, his obsession, all came to light in the aftermath. Once a successful and respected cardiologist, Tyrone's world came crashing down with the weight of the charges against him. His medical license was revoked, a clear symbol of his fall from grace. The man who had once saved lives was now a murderer, unable to escape the consequences of his own actions. As the legal proceedings began, it became painfully clear that Tyrone's once perfect life had been built on a foundation of lies. The charm, the wealth, the respect, everything had been a carefully constructed facade, one that cracked beyond repair the moment the truth was revealed. Public opinion was swift and unforgiving. News outlets covered every detail, every twist in the case. The nation watched as Tyrone, the man who had once had it all, lost everything: his career, his reputation, his freedom. It was no longer just a personal tragedy. It had become a cautionary tale. A reminder that even those who seemed the most perfect, the most successful, could be hiding something darker beneath the surface. Now, Tyrone sat in his cell, the walls closing in on him. His mind, once consumed with control and perfection, reeled with the consequences of his actions. But there was no escaping the truth. No matter how much he wished to turn back time, He couldn't undo what he had done. The story of Tyrone Walker, once a rising star in the medical field, was now one of ruin. In the end, no one was spared. Tasha was gone. Tyrone's future was shattered. And Marcus, the man who had once been part of the family, was now a fugitive in his own right. The web of betrayal had ensnared them all, leaving nothing behind but the wreckage of lives that had once seemed so perfect. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating. Tension rippled through the air as Tyrone Walker's fate hung in the balance. His trial had become a spectacle, a grim reflection of the twisted events that had led to Tasha's tragic death. Prosecutors wasted no time, setting the stage for what they argued was a carefully orchestrated act of violence. They painted a picture of a man who had methodically planned his wife's murder after discovering the affair. They pointed to the evidence, the paternity test, the texts, the fitness tracker data, pieces of the puzzle that suggested Tyrone had known about the affair long before that fateful night. The night of the murder, they argued, had been the culmination of simmering rage. Tyrone hadn't lost control in a moment of passion. He had been planning his revenge, unraveling Tasha's life before striking. He had taken everything from her. He had taken her life. Yet, Tyrone's defense team introduced a counterargument that stunned the courtroom: temporary insanity. They claimed Tyrone had snapped, unable to cope with the devastating revelation that the child Tasha was carrying wasn't his. The affair, the betrayal, he had been blind to the truth, and in that moment he had lost control. They portrayed him as a man driven to madness, whose mind shattered in the face of impossible betrayal. As the defense spoke, Tyrone sat quietly, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. The anger and frustration that had once burned within him seemed muted now, buried beneath a veil of remorse, or perhaps it was fear. Then, the unexpected happened. Marcus Johnson, the other man caught in this tangled web, was called to the stand. He was a shadow of the confident, charismatic man he had once been. Now, he was just a man under scrutiny, forced to answer for his role in the tragedy. With a shaky voice, Marcus spoke, blaming Tasha for everything that had happened. "She told me she was on birth control," he said, his words faltering. "She lied about it. She lied about using protection. If she had just told me the truth, none of this would have happened." The words echoed in the courtroom, and for a moment the silence was deafening. Tasha, the woman who had once been so full of life, had become nothing more than a pawn in the men's twisted game. Neither of them took responsibility for the destruction they had caused. Tyrone, now facing the weight of his own choices, sat motionless in his seat, his eyes hollow. Marcus, too, seemed lost in the chaos of his own mind. The courtroom became a theater of shattered lives, each one vying for some semblance of control over the narrative that had torn them apart. The jury deliberated for hours. Tyrone's future was now in their hands, and as they returned to the courtroom, the tension was unbearable. The judge's gavel struck, and the room fell into a hushed silence. "Guilty of second-degree murder." The words hung in the air, final and irrevocable. Tyrone Walker was convicted of killing his wife, the woman he had once vowed to protect and cherish. His world, already shattered beyond recognition, now seemed to collapse under the weight of his actions. The pride he had once felt as a respected professional, the admiration he had earned from his peers, none of it mattered now. He was a convicted killer, and nothing could undo the blood on his hands. But it was during the sentencing hearing that the true horror of the situation became apparent. Tyrone's defense attorney requested that the judge consider a letter Tyrone had written, a letter that would offer a glimpse into the mind of a man who had destroyed everything he held dear. The courtroom fell silent as the letter was read aloud. "I lost my child twice, first to him, then to myself." The words were cold, detached, and yet they carried with them the weight of a broken soul. Tyrone had not just lost a child, he had lost himself. In a moment of rage, he had destroyed everything, and in the aftermath, he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. The haunting nature of his letter settled over the room, leaving everyone who heard it with a sense of unease. How much of Tyrone's anguish was real? And how much was simply the self-pity of a man who had thrown his life away in a fit of uncontrollable rage? The jury's decision was made, but the trial had revealed something far darker than anyone could have anticipated. It wasn't just the betrayal of one man to another, or the pain of a wife betrayed by her husband. It was the collapse of a family built on lies, obsession, and, ultimately, violence. Infidelity, rage, betrayal. A family destroyed in a single, violent moment. One decision, one horrible, unforgivable choice, had changed everything. Tasha's life was taken. Tyrone's future was irreparably broken. Marcus, too, had to face the consequences of his actions. And the question lingers, could this crime have been prevented? If Tyrone had trusted Tasha, if he had allowed her space, if he hadn't let his jealousy consume him, could things have been different? If Marcus had taken responsibility for his part, would Tasha have still been alive? The answers are buried in the wreckage, but the tragedy remains. What do you think? Was this a crime of passion, or something far darker? Could it have been stopped before it reached the point of no return? Let us know in the comments below. We'll be waiting to hear your thoughts. And remember, stories like this are often more than just a tragic tale. They are a reflection of the fragility of trust, of how quickly things can unravel when we let our worst impulses take over.